Nia Carter stepped into the lecture hall with her books clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes scanning the rows of unfamiliar faces. It was her first day at the prestigious Middleton University, and she had worked tirelessly to earn her spot. But as she took a seat near the front, she could feel the stares, some curious, some cold, and one especially stern, the professors. Professor James Whitaker, a man known for his rigid discipline and sharp tongue, eyed Nia with a hint of disdain. He didn't greet her or acknowledge her presence, not even with a nod. Instead, he began his lecture with a tone that immediately made her stomach churn. Nia tried to follow along, but every question she asked was met with sarcasm or dismissal. The tension between them grew with each passing class. While other students were praised for their insights, Nia's answers were scrutinized and often labeled as incomplete or off-topic. Her assignments came back with red marks that felt more like battle wounds than feedback. It was clear Whitaker had no intention of letting her thrive. Still, Nia stayed late after class, attended every office hour, and rewrote every paper with diligence. But nothing seemed to matter. When her first semester GPA arrived, she saw the damage clearly. Professor Whitaker had failed her, not because she hadn't tried, but because she had dared to believe she belonged. Nia didn't want to accept it, but the pattern was undeniable. While her peers flourished, she continued to struggle under Whitaker's class. She retook his course, hoping to prove herself again, but the result was the same: failure. The administration chalked it up to academic performance, and her appeals fell on deaf ears. Other black students whispered similar stories about Whitaker, but none had come forward formally. Some feared retaliation. Others had simply transferred out. But Nia wasn't wired that way. She couldn't walk away from something she knew wasn't right. She started documenting every interaction, every grade, every dismissive comment. Her friends urged her to let it go, to focus on other professors and salvage her GPA. But she couldn't shake the sense of injustice. She had worked too hard to let someone strip away her dignity in silence. Still, with little support and mounting stress, she began to feel her dreams slipping away. By her junior year, Nia's confidence was shattered. She was no longer the bright-eyed student who believed that hard work would speak louder than prejudice. Instead, she carried quiet pain and growing rage, masked behind forced smiles and sleepless nights. But deep down, a seed had been planted, one that would grow stronger with time. It all came to a head during a seminar presentation. Nia had poured herself into the research, spent weeks perfecting every slide, and rehearsed until her voice cracked. When the day came, she stood before the class with steady hands and clear conviction, until Whitaker cut her off mid-sentence with a smirk. "This is what happens when you rely on emotion instead of intellect," he said, dismissing her work in front of everyone. The room went silent. Nia's throat tightened, and for the first time she didn't hold back. She stood her ground, defending her research with calm fury. But Whitaker simply turned away, uninterested. That night, Nia broke down. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the years of invalidation, the erasure of her voice. She considered quitting, leaving the university entirely. But then she looked at the stack of notebooks filled with her dreams and defiance. She couldn't leave. Not yet, not like this. Instead of withdrawing, Nia pivoted. She changed her major to focus on race and power in education. She poured her energy into studying systemic bias, not just surviving it. Every slight became fuel. Every dismissal became data. She was no longer just a student. She was becoming something more dangerous to the system, aware. Graduation day came without fanfare. Nia walked across the stage with her head high, her name mispronounced by the same professor who once said she wouldn't make it past freshman year. Her family cheered from the stands, unaware of the full storm she had weathered. But inside her, peace had taken root. She didn't stop there. With her new purpose driving her, Nia applied to graduate programs that focused on educational policy and reform. She was accepted into one of the top programs in the country, where her voice was not only heard, it was amplified. She published her first paper within the year, challenging the racial disparities in university evaluation systems. By the time she finished her PhD, she had become a sought-after speaker on equity in academia. She had taken every piece of pain and transformed it into powerful insight. And though her journey had taken her far from Middleton University, she hadn't forgotten it, or Professor Whitaker. Years later, when she received a call about a leadership position back at Middleton, she didn't hesitate. The school was trying to rebuild its reputation after several scandals, and they needed someone who understood the cracks in the foundation. Nia was ready to return, not as a student, but as the new Dean of Faculty Affairs. Nia's heels echoed down the corridor of Middleton University's administrative wing, a space she had never entered as a student. She was now Dr. Nia Carter, recently appointed Dean of Faculty Affairs. Her first day was filled with polite smiles, strategic greetings, and a dozen carefully worded emails. But her real focus was the upcoming faculty orientation, where she'd meet the professors under her authority. When she walked into the grand conference room, she scanned the crowd of seated faculty. And there he was, Professor Whitaker, seated at the far end, his posture as stiff as ever. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she could see the flicker of recognition in his gaze. But he didn't speak. He looked away, almost as if he didn't trust what he'd just seen. Nia began her speech with calm authority, welcoming the faculty and outlining her vision for accountability, transparency, and equity. She didn't mention names or incidents, but her words were intentional. As she spoke about biases in grading, the need for cultural competency, and the overhaul of faculty review systems, she noticed Whitaker shifting in his seat. After the meeting, faculty members approached her to express their enthusiasm and support. Whitaker did not. He remained seated, pretending to scribble notes, then quickly exited before she could reach him. Nia watched him go with a composed smile. She didn't need to chase him. He would come to her soon enough. It didn't take long. Within a week, Professor Whitaker requested a private meeting, citing concerns over policy direction. Nia scheduled the appointment without hesitation. When he walked into her office, he paused for a moment, clearly unsettled by the sight of her name on the door and the authority it now represented. They exchanged formalities, but the tension was thick. Whitaker finally spoke, questioning the merit of her new policies. He implied they were driven more by social agendas than academic rigor. Nia listened silently, letting him expose himself with every carefully coded word. Then she leaned forward and said plainly, "I know exactly how you grade. I lived it." The silence was electric. Whitaker's face froze. His posture stiffened. He tried to defend his past decisions with academic jargon, but Nia didn't allow it. She pulled up the documented patterns of racial discrepancies in his grading over the past 10 years, an analysis she had quietly commissioned before her arrival. The evidence was irrefutable. Whitaker's voice wavered. He stammered about not meaning any harm, about students needing to be held to high standards. Nia stopped him cold. High standards aren't the problem. Biased execution is. She told him he'd be placed under formal review. For the first time, the man who had once failed her couldn't even meet her gaze. News of Whitaker's review rippled through the university. Some faculty bristled. Others, especially the younger and more diverse staff, welcomed the accountability. For years, many had quietly accepted the status quo. But now, under Nia's leadership, a wave of change was beginning to swell. Nia didn't stop at Whitaker. She began overhauling the faculty evaluation system entirely. She introduced student feedback analysis, unconscious bias training, and anonymous peer reviews. Some resisted, but most adapted, recognizing the need for fairness, not just in word, but in practice. The old guard watched cautiously, unsure of what might come next. Students began noticing the difference too. Office hours became more accessible. Feedback became more constructive. The air on campus felt lighter, less combative. Nia made herself available to them, especially those who had felt unheard, unseen. She didn't just lead from a desk. She led from presence, from memory, from mission. And though she had gained respect, not everyone celebrated her. Whitaker, demoted and under continuous observation, avoided her at every opportunity, but that no longer mattered. Nia wasn't seeking revenge, she was setting a standard. The same man who had once tried to erase her voice now worked in a system she had built. Months later, the university held its annual faculty awards ceremony. Nia sat near the front, quietly observing as names were called and applause echoed. She hadn't expected to be honored. Her work was never about accolades. But then the chancellor took the stage with a special announcement. With a warm smile, the chancellor spoke about transformation, resilience, and courage. And then he called Nia's name. The audience rose in a standing ovation as she made her way to the stage. She accepted the Excellence in Educational Leadership Award, her voice steady as she thanked those who had fought for equity before her. In the back row, Whitaker remained seated, his face unreadable. Nia didn't look for him. She had already won something far greater than his approval. She had turned pain into policy, silence into strength, and now she was the model for what leadership looked like in a world that had once tried to silence her. Later that night, alone in her office, Nia looked out over the quiet campus. The lights of Middleton University glowed softly in the distance. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who had nearly given up, and she whispered a quiet promise. You were never wrong for dreaming. As the months passed, the impact of Nia's leadership began to take visible shape across Middleton University. Enrollment numbers for minority students increased, and retention rates began to climb. For the first time in years, students felt like the university was built for them, not just around them. Nia wasn't just changing policy, she was changing culture. One of her most revolutionary initiatives was the Truth in Teaching Project, a program designed to give marginalized students a platform to anonymously share their academic experiences. The stories range from subtle slights to outright discrimination. And while the revelations were difficult to digest, Nia made sure every voice was heard. The project quickly garnered national attention. Other universities began reaching out, asking for guidance in implementing similar reforms. Educational journals started publishing Nia's research and citing her strategies as groundbreaking. She was no longer just a voice in the fight. She had become a leading figure in the national conversation on equity in education. But success also brought scrutiny. Alumni from the old guard complained that the university was becoming too political. Some donors pulled their support, citing discomfort with the school's new direction. Nia knew this would come. Real change always has a price. But she also knew who she was fighting for, and she would not retreat. Despite the mounting pressure, Nia continued pushing forward. One of her boldest moves came when she proposed a new tenure review process, one that considered a professor's impact on all students, not just research output. It was radical, it was controversial, and it sent shockwaves through the faculty ranks. Unsurprisingly, Whitaker became the most vocal opponent. He argued that it undermined academic freedom and lowered standards. He rallied a small group of professors to resist the proposal, calling it meritless activism disguised as reform. It was the old language of power, repackaged as concern. Nia faced the backlash head-on. She held open forums, met with department heads, and presented detailed data showing how traditional tenure metrics had perpetuated systemic inequality. If our standards exclude excellence from those outside the mold, then our standards are flawed, she told them. Eventually, the vote came. The room was tense, faculty divided. But when the ballots were counted, the new tenure policy passed by a narrow margin. It was a watershed moment, proof that even the most rigid institutions could bend toward justice. Nia didn't celebrate. She simply moved to the next challenge, quietly like always. In the wake of the policy change, several professors voluntarily retired. Others adapted, some reluctantly. But a new wave of educators began to rise. Young, diverse, and deeply inspired by Nia's work. The school's culture was shifting, and for the first time, it wasn't just performative, it was structural. Whitaker, stripped of many of his former privileges, became a ghost of the man he once was on campus. He no longer sat on important committees. He taught fewer classes, and when he did lecture, his classrooms were half empty. Students no longer flocked to him. They followed the path that Nia had carved. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, Nia found a letter slid under her office door. It was from a current student, black like she had once been, who wrote about nearly dropping out due to similar experiences with a different professor. But the student stayed, they said, because of her. You made room for me to believe, it read. Tears welled in Nia's eyes. It wasn't just about policies and programs. It was about people, about the generations she was helping to protect, to uplift, to embolden. Her pain had become a pathway for others, and there was no recognition greater than that. A year later, Nia was invited to deliver the keynote address at a national conference on educational justice. Scholars, deans, and policymakers from across the country filled the auditorium. As she stepped onto the stage, she thought of how far she had come, from the girl who once cried in her dorm to the woman now commanding national respect. Her speech was powerful, personal, and unapologetically direct. She spoke of broken systems, yes, but more importantly, she spoke of healing, of restoration, of responsibility. We cannot fix what we refuse to acknowledge, she said, but once we do, we are obligated to rebuild something better. After the standing ovation faded and the lights dimmed, Nia stood backstage, momentarily overwhelmed by it all. Then from the side curtain, a familiar face emerged. Professor Whitaker, older, frailer. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her, eyes heavy with something that looked like regret. "I didn't see you then," he said quietly, "but I see now. You did what I never could." Nia didn't answer right away. She looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. "You didn't have to see me to do right by me," she replied, "but now that you do, make sure you never close your eyes again." Years after Nia's policies reshaped Middleton University, a cultural renaissance blossomed across campus. What had once been a place of quiet exclusion now echoed with student-led initiatives, diverse faculty hires, and open dialogues about identity and inclusion. The foundation Nia had built was no longer just an administrative shift. It had become a movement. Freshmen walked the same halls Nia once did, unaware of the war fought before their arrival. They studied under professors who had been trained in new frameworks, discussed readings from authors they once would have never encountered in the curriculum, and voiced their ideas freely without fear of being dismissed. The environment was transformed. One such student, Asha Reynolds, came to Middleton with stories similar to Nia's, bright, driven, but wary of the institution. On her first day, she noticed a portrait on the wall outside the dean's office. It was of Dr. Nia Carter, her story summarized in a bronze plaque beneath it. That image stayed with Asha. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a mirror. Asha later found herself struggling in a seminar. The professor, though fair, couldn't understand her lived experience, and she began to withdraw. But instead of retreating, Asha remembered the name, Carter. She reached out, sent an email, unsure if it would even be read. But Nia responded within a day, with warmth, encouragement, and an invitation to her office. Their meeting was simple, just tea and talk. But for Asha, it was transformative. Nia didn't give a lecture or offer a fix. She simply listened. And in that listening, Asha found strength. She left the office feeling heard, empowered, and hungry to make her own mark. That was Nia's gift, planting seeds she might never see bloom. Afterward, Asha started a student collective focused on curriculum reform through intersectional lenses. She worked with faculty, organized forums, and built alliances. Her efforts mirrored the fire Nia had once carried alone. But now that fire had multiplied, passed from hand to hand, voice to voice. Nia watched with quiet pride. She didn't insert herself into the spotlight. She didn't need to. Her legacy wasn't about being seen. It was about what others saw because of her. Each time a student stepped forward and spoke truth to power, she felt the echo of her own journey reborn in theirs. Meanwhile, national institutions continued to adopt her models. She was invited to serve on advisory boards, tasked with shaping education at the federal level. But Middleton remained her heartbeat. It was where her scars were formed and where her triumphs took root. After more than a decade of transformative leadership, Nia announced her intention to step down as dean. It wasn't a retreat, it was a transition. She had taken the university as far as she could from that seat. Now it was time for someone else to lead. Someone new, maybe someone who once walked the path she had carved. The announcement sparked an outpouring of emotion from faculty, students, and alumni alike. Tributes poured in, essays, speeches, even murals painted by art students. Asha, now a senior, led a farewell event titled The Carter Years. It was a celebration of justice, voice, and resilience. Nia sat quietly in the front row, eyes glistening. Whitaker, retired by then, attended the event as well. He kept to the back of the auditorium, listening intently to stories that highlighted the cracks he once represented. In the healing that followed, he said nothing, but he stayed to the end. That alone spoke volumes. In her final address, Nia said, "Power is not the goal, justice is. And justice is not something we inherit. It's something we make, moment by moment, hand in hand." Her words echoed like scripture through the auditorium, lingering in the air long after she stepped away from the podium. Nia transitioned into a new chapter of her life. Consulting, mentoring, writing. She published a memoir titled Grades and Grace, chronicling her journey from silent student to academic trailblazer. The book became a bestseller, taught in universities across the country as required reading in education and social policy programs. Middleton eventually renamed one of its academic buildings in her honor, the Carter Center for Transformative Learning. But perhaps more meaningful was the internal transformation, how professors now mentored students with empathy, how policies prioritized equity, and how leadership was defined by courage, not comfort. Years later, Asha returned to Middleton, not as a student, but as its new dean of students. Her first day, she stopped outside Nia's portrait again. This time, she whispered a thank you, not just for the doors Nia opened, but for the light she left on inside. And somewhere in a quiet home lined with books and memories, Nia Carter read about the appointment in a newsletter. She smiled, closed her laptop, and looked out the window. The world had changed, and she had helped shape it. Her legacy didn't need applause. It lived on in every student who now walked through those gates believing, I belong.